There you go. Hi, Maya.
Good morning, Timothy.
Good morning, everybody. Today is March 26th. Maya, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is our 111th
You're
consecutive
right.
episode, right?
There's no mistake there. Yeah.
Great. So 111, thank you very much for joining us. For those of you who have been subscribing all the time, like Mario and Masao and Yuka, and also to our new listeners, thank you very much for joining us for a weekly update on what's going on that is important to you in Japanese politics, and we'll continue that today. Before we get into too much of what's going on in Japanese politics, Maya, there was a death last week of somebody who was very significant to me, and I wanted to share that with the audience. This was Nakayama Taro. He died on the 15th of this month. He was 98 years old, and as many of you know, he was foreign minister in the Kaifu administration. Throughout the entire Kaifu administration, he was foreign minister and was influential in the Gulf War when the United States and the Unified Nations were fighting in the Gulf War. And he was also very instrumental in the revision of the Japanese Constitution and having monthly meetings and pulling together politicians, primarily from the LDP, on study groups and study sessions there. The reason why Dr. Nakayama was so influential is because, as many of you know, he hired me out of law school in Sendai, when I was in Sendai, to become his policy secretary in 1982. This was the first time for a foreigner to work inside the parliament in an official capacity. There had been others who had been on maybe the Luce Foundation or the Mansfield Fellows or something like that, who were like seconded into various ministries and sometimes to various Diet members' offices. But this was the first time to be officially recognized, and it was a very big deal. It was a big deal for me. It was a big experiment for Dr. Nakayama. He told me when he hired me that it had never been done and we might catch a little bit of heat for it, but he was committed to pushing it forward. So he hired me, and only afterwards did I realize how big a deal this was. Getting the official recognition, having the lapel badge that certified me, and having free access throughout both houses of the parliament and the prime minister's residence as well, and also just joining this pretty significant politician on his daily routes and over the weekends visiting various election districts and helping a lot of people who were in the Seiwakai, which is currently known as the Abe faction, but helping many members there in their election bids. When he hired me, Dr. Nakayama was in the upper house, and he 2 years later decided to go into the lower house, just exactly what the current foreign minister Hayashi did. He was in the upper house. He wants to go become a candidate for prime minister, so he went into the lower house, and he is a lower house member now. Also, Mr. Seko, who is also in the upper house, is making moves to go to the lower house in the next election, as we've discussed here. But it's not a unique tactic to do that. I mean, if you have your aspirations to become prime minister, you must be in the lower house. You can't be in the upper house. So this was Dr. Nakayama's plan to become prime minister. And I helped him on this campaign. I left law school in the United States to come help him on his campaign. His district was appointed to him by the LDP. He was a House of Councilors member, one of two, in Osaka. And the LDP put him in Sakaishi, which is the city it didn't have the bridge yet. It didn't have the island where the international airport is sitting in the middle of the bay there yet. But I think they wanted an LDP person in this district. They had never had an LDP person in the 5 seats of this district. And so they selected him to go to this section and won by a landslide. And as a consequence of that, very significant win, he became foreign minister, and I went back to law school at Georgetown. So significant was this for him and also for me. 60 Minutes did a piece on it. 60 Minutes is a pretty big global program talking about various issues. And in one of their 15-minute segments, Maya, I can hear you in the background if you don't mind muting.
No, I will mute myself. Okay.
Okay.
Apologies for that.
Sounds like you're eating crackers. So this was, 60 Minutes is a pretty big deal. They dedicated one of their 15-minute segments to the fact that there was this foreigner working in the Japanese parliament, and even though the trade issues between Japan and the United States were very tense, and the Americans were having a difficult time selling their cars in Japan, even though the Japanese were having a heyday selling their cars in the United States, there was no reciprocity from the Americans' perspective, and there was also a lot of trade disputes. And as a consequence of that, that was the first trade war between Japan and the United States, and that was kind of what helped usher me into the parliament. And as a result of that, I mean, that's why I'm able to do the things that I do in Japanese industry and economy now, being a kind of a lobbyist, although we don't like to use that word, but a government affairs professional in this country. All had its foundation there a long time ago. So I wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Nakayama, his passing just this last week. Pretty sad for me. He was influential to me in my career, and also a great mentor to me, and his family continues to be very influential in Japanese politics. So it's not meant to be a brag, but just an acknowledgement of his passing, and I just wanted to share that with everybody. Moving on, Prime Minister Kishida has been on a roll. We always announce the briefings every week, and I announced this last week that there is so much going on in the dynamics of Japanese politics this last week, and it just continues, the pace continues to increase every week, and I'm just always surprised and, grateful for the show, because it allows me to kind of put it into context, and then also it forces me to follow it and to report to you in understandable, concise chunks that we can, from week to week, weave it together so everybody in this briefing has a better understanding of what's going on. But when you consider that the Prime Minister met with the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, last week, he slipped away secretly and successfully this time to meet with Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. He met with President Yoon of South Korea. He is just on fire, and he's burnishing his image as a global diplomatic peace arbiter, perhaps. He's got competition there with President Xi also doing the same thing on the other side of the fence with Russia, with Saudi Arabia and Iran. So he is also moving very quickly in that direction too. But the Prime Minister is doing so much on getting this coalition of forces together, also at the behest of the United States, because the United States wants to have this coalition of like-minded countries and peace and prosperity and free access in the Indo-Pacific. So there's a lot going on there. The foreign minister spent 5 days this last week visiting the Pacific Islands. This is pretty significant. You might remember that the Solomon Islands signed a deal somewhat quickly, somewhat secretly, with China last year, which allowed access to their ports for potentially military vessels to stay, to disembark, to refuel, and that sort of thing. They cut off their diplomatic relations with Taiwan 2 years earlier. So the Chinese are really building this base as the United States is kind of trying to catch up. In coalition and in concert with that, the Japanese are also doing the same thing. So the Prime Minister went to India. He announced a $75 billion US dollar package, equivalent to that amount of money, for the region, for development, for infrastructure projects to help, build this coalition of countries. And the Chinese are doing the same thing with the Belt and Road Initiative that has been going on for 12 years. So there's a lot of competition going on there, and it's like these fists are just getting ready to clash a little bit more hard. The Prime Minister kind of snubbed China last week when the exiting ambassador was going back to Japan. He's accepted the new ambassador to come in, but typically when the ambassador leaves, he has an audience with the Prime Minister, and this this prime minister did not meet with the exiting ambassador from China just 2 weeks ago. And it's a signal of relations not being so great. It is unusual for the prime minister not to meet, especially with a country as important as China. It's a little bit of tit for tat because the Chinese did the same thing with the Japanese exiting ambassador recently. So this tit for tat, this gauging of people on various levels, it all indicates that at a grander scale, the tensions are beginning to build. So the United States and Japan have solidified their deal on the Tomahawk missiles. Japan is moving forward with the defense spending to increase, including the 500 Tomahawks that they've decided to purchase. And just in recent news, they've decided to upgrade the Tomahawks for the Aegis carriers and on-land basing of these Tomahawks. I think with a view or with a mind of creating this kind of iron dome like they have in Israel. But this is very expensive and very long-term, and the Japanese government is moving briskly in that direction in a lot of different ways. In addition to that, we've got the elections that are coming up that are, you've probably heard some of the soundtracks going on. 9 governors will be elected on April 9th. Today is, the 26th, so in less than 2 weeks, that election will be for 9 governors. And then, 2 days later, the campaigning starts for the by-elections for 5 members of the Diet, seats that have been vacated through lots of different reasons, but it's not time for a upper house election or a lower house election, but these seats have been vacant and they need to be filled, and they're filled at this time of the year. So there are 5 of those seats. 4 of them are lower house, 1 is an upper house. And at the same time, 2,260 seats, municipal seats, that means mayors, municipal elections, city council, that sort of thing. That happens 2 days later, and then on the 23rd, that will be their election day. And one of the issues that will be considered by the people who are running for office is how Japan is going to pay for this defense spending. And we've talked about that several times in this briefing about the 4 tiers, how it's going to be paid for with corporate taxes, with personal taxes, with a tobacco tax, and with a tax from various belt-tightening initiatives that the Prime Minister will run out of his office. So I think that the Japanese population has widely commented that we need to increase defense spending from 1% of GDP to 2%. It's okay with us. 80% of the Japanese population have voted for that. With regard to how it is being spent, there were 2 schools of thought. One was offered by Mr. Kishida. The other was offered by Mr. Hagiura, who is one of the top contenders for leadership within the Seiwakai, the Abe faction. Mr. Hagiura's plan kind of lost favor, and Mr. Kishida's has taken favor. And so I think this election will be, predominantly won by the LDP going forward. The Prime Minister's approval rating, you might have been following this, it was 33.1% in February. It is now standing at 38%. That is huge. That is a big boost. And that is without calculating 2 very important things that happened just this last week. The first was this sneak-away trip to visit with Zelensky. And the second, funnily enough, is the Samurai Japan winning the World Baseball Classic this last week. You can't be in Japan and not know that happened. This is a huge event for Japan. And Maya, it probably bears a little bit of talking about, because it was like the whole nation has had a plastic top put over it, a steaming cup of coffee. The plastic top is on top of it for 3 years. COVID and stay home and wear your mask. The mask mandate has ended, so you'll notice that less people are wearing masks. I've been to many meetings and briefings this week where inside the briefing, sometimes 300 people. I went to one 300 people 2 days ago, and only about 20% of the people in the room were wearing masks. So you're seeing that, and it was like with the baseball classic, people yelling and screaming and slapping themselves on the backs and all of this. It was like a kind of a jubilation that we have moved beyond that. And this release of tension, this opening at the same time that the cherry blossoms are starting to emerge. I think it's a critical feature that impacts not only the Japanese psyche, but also Japanese politics. So this bodes very well for the current prime minister, and I think he will do well, not only with the governors. It's pretty much a cut and dried case, but we have to go through the election to figure that out. But even if the LDP doesn't sweep all of the elections, or even less, I'm sure it will sweep 50% of them. But even if it doesn't reflect that poorly on the prime minister. If it goes well, he's going to raise his flag and beat his chest and say, "Aren't I the greatest?" And there is only a very small window of time between now and the start of the campaigning for these 5 diet seats and the 2020 260 municipal seats, for the prime minister to potentially call an election for the lower house. He can close down the house. And it is a rumor that is going on. We've talked about it with varying degrees of veracity over the last 3 weeks, because sometimes it looks good and most of the time it doesn't really look that like a good option for him. But now it does. And I think that is one of the reasons underpinning why he went and visited with Zelensky. He wanted to be viewed as this kind of global leader. It's so important for him to do that. And if he closes down the house, it will be because I'm a global leader. Look how well I'm doing. It is going to be a little bit before the elections tell us how well the LDP or how well Mr. Kishida is being viewed. It's a bit of a gamble for him, but I think the elections that we have, the upper house elections and the next elections are in the summer of 2025. The lower house elections are scheduled for October of 2025. The prime minister is in his position until September of 2024. So there is a room for him to play this. He can do it now, or he's got some time to do it later. But if the winds of change are in his back and filling his sail, the analysts are saying he could close down the lower house. And the time to do that would be, the last day he could do that is April 11th. April 11th starts the campaign for the diet seats, the 5 diet seats, and all of the municipal seats. If he's going to close down the house, he would do it on that day. It would be a snap election. Campaigning would start immediately for the 400 and almost 500 seats in the lower house. So that's what we're looking at. That's what we're anticipating. I don't know if it's a little bit early to call that, but the fact that he snuck away after visiting with the Prime Minister of India to visit with Zelensky tells you he is thinking very much about this. With 38 percentage points in his favor right now, his disapproval ratings are falling. It is possible that he could make that move, and we're going to be watching it very carefully. The other things that are kind of going in his favor is, we've talked about this too, the wage gains. This is the spring offensive time. This is when labor unions and management sit down. They bang out, how much they're going to pay in wages. Last year, wages were up 2.3%. Wage gains this year are scheduled to be, with across the board, about 3.8%. So this is the greatest gain since 1993, when it was, let me see, what was it in 1993? I think it was about 2.7%. So 2.7%. The base wage are up 2.3% this year going forward. So that means that a lot of people got a wage raise that is consistent with every year they're going to, this wage is going to carry forward, but also that there's a big bonus component of that. So this year, your wage is going to go up, let's say 2.3%, which is not great, but your bonus is going to be maybe 6 months of your salary or 5 months of your salary. I think Uniqlo and Toyota are giving maybe 6 or 7 months of salary as a bonus to get the people over the hump. So this is huge news. It's huge news for the Japanese economy, and strangely enough, it's huge news for Mr. Kuroda, the Bank of Japan. He's still the governor of the Bank of Japan until April 9th, and he was always advising that wages need to increase to account for the inflation. Inflation in Japan today, the Consumer Price Index indicates about a 4.4% increase. So even if wages increase by 3 or 4%, it's still not catching up with inflation, and people are still poorer than they should have been had the economy kept up. Wages in the United States have increased since 1994, 25% in South Korea, 17% in Japan. They have kept pretty stable, no large increases. And so we have this phenomenon now. I think people have noted it, and you've probably noticed it and read about it, where there's a kind of reverse immigration going on here in Japan. That means that Japanese workers are considering going to Australia, England, the United States, anywhere to work because the wages are higher there. They can spend more time with their family. There is this exodus. It's not a huge exodus, but it is a significant exodus because the wages are so low here, and people can go overseas and earn more money, even doing just the same level of work, or maybe even changing their careers. So that's a worrisome feature, because the number of workers in Japan is 15% less than it was in 1994. So although the wages are increasing in the United States and in other economies, they're remaining flat here, but the number of people is decreasing. So something's got to give. Mr. Kuroda advised a 3% increase, so the fact that 3.8 was reached is good news. He will be changing over to Mr. Ueda as the Bank of Japan governor on April 9th, and we can anticipate that there will be changes with the bank rate and also with the yen value. The yen did not react poorly with this recent news, so it looks like things are on an even keel. We also talked about last week about the influence of the bank contagion in the United States that's going on with Silicon Valley Bank and some of the banks that are having problems there. That story has not finished. It is still in play, but I think the contagion influence to Japanese banks, although there was some concern raised in the briefing last week, is not as hot and heavy as some might have predicted. So hopefully we'll be able to dodge that bullet. You might remember that in our briefing last week, one of our astute attendees on this briefing mentioned that Olaf Scholz was in town, and he was in town on Saturday. I didn't quite catch that news, and so I wasn't able to comment on it. But yes, he came here on his way to China, hitting Japan first, then China. So usually, if you're Chinese, you would expect the respect that is due to you by being visited first, and Japan second. So that's not what he did. So that is also sending a signal. It was a significant bilateral meeting with the president, the chancellor of Germany, meeting with Mr. Kishida and bringing 5 members of his cabinet. So they had cabinet ministerials during the visit here, a very brief visit. They were talking about defense, climate, and critical raw materials. This is a big deal. Japan passed the economic security legislation just before we finished this last year, so that is going into effect. And the Germans are also considering similar kinds of legislation. But the fact that he came with so many cabinet ministers, they met the Japanese cabinet, and they didn't really produce a whole lot of press releases on that. But Japan and Australia, Japan and South Korea, Japan and Australia, England, Japan and Germany, Japan and the United States, obviously, this coalition of forces is really taking on real significant appendages and agreements to build this coalition stronger and stronger. And at the same time, you've got President Xi meeting with Putin just this last week, a 3-day visit. This is significant there too. Xi is also, as we mentioned earlier, trying to be a peace broker. He's trying to be a global leader as well. And he's just brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran to establish diplomatic ties. This is a huge deal. And he's also trying to broker a deal for peace in the Ukraine, which is being poo-hooed a little bit. Dr. Stephen Nagy wrote an excellent piece on his analysis of this in the Japan Times last week. If you're interested in that, please take a look at that. Do you have him on this next week, Maya? I'm not sure.
No, not yet. Maybe a
Okay.
couple of weeks later.
Right. So he's every other week. He usually shows up on your room, right?
He does. We're just having a break because, well, of some circumstances that they have made, those circumstances have made it difficult for him to be on air.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
yeah.
We don't have those circumstances, so we're always here.
Yeah, we are always on air, sometimes without the visual presentation, but that's it.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's basically the hot. There are lots of hot items that I would like to get into. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the relationship between Japan and South Korea is also taking on new added virality. The trade dispute has been solved. They've buried the hatchet on the compensation issue. I don't know if Kishida has extended the invitation for President Yoon to join G7, but when he was in India, he did extend that invitation to President Modi. So I don't know I would have thought that an invitation would have been issued and it would have been warmly received. There's still a little bit of dancing to go on there. But I think I'd prefer to just open it up. This is about as much as I can give on the big items that are going on. Maybe there are other issues that we can discuss, but with that, Maya, I'd like to wrap up this week's briefing and go right into our Q&A.
Waiting, Timothy. So you mentioned that there is a possibility for PM Kishida to call a snap election, and I just wondered what are the possible or some of the possible benefits for him of doing that, because as you said, it's more or less of a gamble.
It is a gamble.
Yes, and it's not 100% sure that that snap election will be really, if it happens, that it will be beneficial to the LDP, and so I wonder what really is the motivation there.
So the calculus here that he is considering, winning or calling down the House, all it does is it restarts the 4-year term for the members of the lower house. So as it stands right now, they have a lower house election in October of 2025. If he closes down the House and they have an election, it restarts the clock for them to have their 4-year term again. It doesn't impact on him being foreign minister any longer beyond September 24, but it does enhance his likability, his popularity with the members who won their election, should there be a snap election. So if the LDP does well, people slap him on the back, he can change his cabinet again, he can reward people, he's got a little bit more staying power. And what he wants to do is exceed what Mr. Abe did. Mr. Abe was the longest serving prime minister. He wants to far exceed that. And so any chance he has to eke out that kind of a likelihood, he's going to do it. So I don't think he's in a position right now to decide, but he's got a drop dead date of the 11th of April, which is not that far away, to make that decision. And it doesn't mean that he can't call an election or close down the House and have an election in the lower house at any other time. It's just that the economy of scale, if he does it now, it would be an election campaign at the same time that these other issues are going on. And so the amount of money that needs to be spent, the machinery that needs to be put in position, it's kind of already there. So it would be, people I think would appreciate if we're going to have an election and you doubled up where there's an election going on already. That's being respectful of the economy and how much money is being spent on politics rather than being spent on children or welfare issues. So I think that's the calculus. So the fact that he is at 38% approval rating now, watch over the next 2 weeks how that number increases or decreases, and also what he does. You'll remember that this was the third attempt for him to go visit Zelensky, and both of them were kind of beaten down or discovered before the fact. This was a secret trip. He went, they love to talk about these kinds of things. He flew on the same kind of airplane that Shohei Otani flew on his private jet from the United States to Japan for the World Baseball Classic. And so they said the prime minister flew from India to Poland using the same kind of plane that Otani flew. So it's neither here nor there, but just parlaying on this fantastic win by the Japanese and riding on that. I mean, it's very clever. But this was a secret tour. He only took 10 other minister-level individuals with him, and it was only released once he was in Poland. He came back and he reported to the entire Diet on Thursday, I believe. They had a meeting of the entire Diet where he reported, I am your prime minister and I'm here to report to you, this is what I did, this is how it happened, this is what I've discovered, as is his obligation. So he is building that base. He's building a little bit of anticipation of this likelihood, so all we can do is watch and guess as well as we can.
Well, yes, I just wonder, since that the news about his visiting President Zelensky was revealed after he reached Poland. I wonder why the secrecy. It's because obviously, well, as long as we know, President Joe Biden also basically they informed the Russian side that he would be there, so that there were no incidents there. And obviously, there was some information to the Russian side this time that PM Kishida was going there, so that nothing unexpected would happen. But why the secrecy here in Japan?
Well, I think it's. I don't think it's the secrecy here in Japan. I think it's the secrecy of him making this kind of visit into a war zone. Some people would say, that's very cavalier of him. That's actually tempting fate, visiting a war zone. And who the hell do you think you are? Some people could say that. So sometimes it's better to do what you want to do and then ask for forgiveness later, rather than going to the Diet and saying, I would like to visit with the prime minister or the president of Ukraine, and cause a big brouhaha and lots of criticism. So I think that was part of it. But also, when the plane lands in Poland and the delegation is getting ready to enter into the Ukrainian territory, all of their cell phones are put into a box and they don't have any cell phone access. All communications are basically being followed by the Russians in any event. So it's secret for a lot of different reasons, but you're right. The Russians need to know so that nobody makes a mistake or a miscalculation, or they tone down a little bit, because you can imagine what kind of an incident would be should something untoward happen inadvertently. That the leader of the G7 was killed in a bombing attack, and the Russians are apologizing for that. So I guess that's part of it. But also, the prime minister needs to kind of manage his relationships with the upper house and the lower house, and not everybody loves him, even within the LDP. So I think in taking this gamble and going to a war zone, he's the last person to of the G7 leaders. He's the last person to go visit with Zelensky. So I think everybody is singing the same tune, and they all feel like we need to support Ukraine. We need to give money to Ukraine. We need to provide them with weapons and materiel so that they can survive. And I think this was his showing support that he needed to do. He needed to do that one way or the other, apparently from his point of view. I don't know if everybody agrees with that, but I think that is a bit of an explanation about why the secrecy was as tight as it was.
Right. Thank you. And also, I wanted to ask you, because I believe that former Minister Mori, he once voiced his opinion about Japan being, well, more supportive of Ukraine than the domestic politics here. Do you think that there is a bunch of politicians that are on the same page as Mori, or is it just his single voice here in Japan?
No. I think the same criticism is being lodged in the United States too. There are a lot of issues that are going on in the United States that beg for attention. When the president visits Ukraine, he could have, productively done other things. He could have productively spent the money that is being dedicated to Ukraine in other areas that are wanting within the United States. It's a similar refrain. And here in Japan, He did dedicate additional funds for the Ukraine support. We mentioned that two or 3 weeks ago, that it's standing at around $7 billion now. Yeah, I think it's kind of a requirement to be in the game, in the team for G7.
Right, I see. Okay, so thank you for that. We have a comment in the chat room, on the room chat now. It is from Hiroko. Hiroko-san, thank you very much for sharing that question. Timothy, I'm going to read it out to you. Could you comment on PM Kishida's unprecedented measures for the shrinking population, low birth rate here?
So that's, thank you for the question. The word that you are using, unprecedented, is Mr. Kishida's word. He announced when he was going to initiate these initiatives that he is going to tackle this issue in an unprecedented way. He is going to pull out all the stops, and he is going to make sure that people have more children, or they're encouraged to have more children. And if you look at the demographies over the last 20 years, this pattern, this pace of a declining birth rate, and also the number of people in the workforce, and the growing number of people who are reaching 60, 65 years old, who are now somewhat dependent on the social services. And I mean, that takes up almost 40% of the spending of the Japanese government is on social services. That's going to be increasing too. So his unprecedented measures, he's beginning to announce those more and more. The amount of money he's dedicating to child care, to education, to parents having leave. So he's initiated a process where fathers who typically don't take home leave when they have a child, probably about 14 or 15% of fathers do take some home leave. He wants to increase that to 30% over the next year and a half, 2 years, and then move it up to 50% within the next 5 years. That's cultural architecture. That is huge dynamic change within the Japanese culture, within the Japanese business culture. So I don't know how he's going to do it, but I think, as usual with initiatives like this, they just throw money at it. So we always come back to the question of, where does all this money come from? The GDP to debt ratio with the Bank of Japan and the amount of bonds that have been issued is 250%. It's the largest of even the G20 countries, not just the G7. But this burden is so huge, and that is one of the challenges for the new Bank of Japan governor. That's why he's a hot topic with us, and why we talk about the yen value and the yield rates for the bonds that are issued by the Japanese government. They've exceeded 50% of the debt of the country. So where this dynamic change is going to happen with child rearing, with having husbands or significant others spending more time during the birthing process or during the first year of when the child is born, that's a big deal, and he needs to get the accommodation of the Japanese corporations to do that. So leading up to that, he has had some success in encouraging the companies to pay their employees more. God damn it, pay them more. So he's been encouraging them. Toyota, Uniqlo, a couple of the companies have come down very heavy and done that and accommodated the prime minister. And as a consequence of that, they will get rewarded with tax breaks, with a little bit of some sweet deals from the Japanese government. The same tactic can be anticipated with child care, with home leave, with parents spending more time raising their kids. So we can focus in on this a little bit more perhaps next week. Let me do a little bit more work on what money is being dedicated and in what areas it's being dedicated, because how the prime minister controls this, initiates and manages this this change that he's looking at, unprecedented. I mean, that's a big word to use. As you know, they've started the agency for child rearing, for the children's agency. So there's a lot going on that, and it just really depends on how much money he's going to dedicate to the various ministries who are in charge of child rearing or education or the kindergartens or the nursery schools, and also just the people who are available to do that. They've got to increase wages to attract those kinds of people. So the HR issue is a huge one as well. I hope that's somewhat responsive, Maya.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Well, Hiroko-san, if you need more information, or if you need us to expand on it, let us know. So yeah, thank you, Timothy, for that. And well, there is another question here. I think that it's a kind of, well, let's say, what's that? Tongue in cheek.
Tongue in cheek?
Yes, about PM Kishida's reaction to the Indian dish go gappe. I don't know what that dish is actually. Well, did his stomach become upset after eating it?
Who's asking the question? That tongue in
That
cheek.
is Satyakam
Okay.
Goswami. Yes.
Yes, please come up because I don't know anything about that. But I've got to mention before you come up on stage, if you can, the food culture in Japan is a huge issue. It's a huge magnet for bringing people into Japan. A lot of foreign visitors. I'm sure it is inescapable if you live in Tokyo how many foreigners there are visiting and travelers and business people coming to Japan. It's just like the gates have been kicked wide open. But food culture is so huge here and so varied. It's one of the attractions. But for example, with the visit of the president of South Korea, the prime minister and the president had two meals very close to each other. One was Korean and one was Japanese. And so, yes, I think you can get indigestion very quickly. So I don't know, Satakam, what the issue was with the Indian food. I, as the longest serving foreign minister, I'm sure he's eaten a lot of Indian food. The Indian food is so delicious. I don't know why he might have had indigestion, but he was on a tight schedule, and things can happen. I'm not aware of that story, so thanks for bringing it up.
Thank you. Well, I don't have any idea what that dish is either, but well, obviously there is something special about it. All right, and yes, Janos, thank you for your question. So I wonder what newspaper Timothy is reading about the U.S. doubting support for Ukraine. Well, I'll let you answer that one, Timothy. But I also think that it's not just newspapers. Especially in my case, I try to get information from many different sources. So it's newspapers, of course, but there are many other channels that we can actually source.
What was the question exactly?
I wonder what newspaper Timothy is reading about the U.S. doubting support for Ukraine.
The U.S. doubting support
for Ukraine.
The U.S. doubts the support that the Japanese have for Ukraine. Is that the question?
I believe it's different because I believe that the question is about what you mentioned. That I asked you about Mori's stance on that he, and then whether there were some other politicians here who would rather have the Prime Minister Kishida work on domestic issues rather than send financial support for Ukraine. And then your comment was that there are similar voices in the United States as well.
Okay, so let me backtrack a little bit. Like you, Maya, I have various sources of information, human sources as well as, Bunshin. We talk about Bunshin all the time. Several, Japanese local newspapers, the English press as well. But we talk about this all the time, and as you know, people here in the audience, I go to maybe 4 or 5, sometimes 6 or more study sessions every week. So this is like a PhD course, that's just rolling. It continues, and so I get good intel on what's going on with Japanese politics and geopolitics as well. But I think that the reason why I mention this, perhaps displeasure or the suspicion from the United States about Japan's support for Ukraine, is because only until recently, the amount of money that the Japanese had dedicated to the Ukrainians was about $2 billion, and which is perceived to be just a drop in the bucket compared to other like-minded countries. And about 4 weeks ago, Japan ponied up and offered another $5 billion. So from 2 to 5, that's a total of 7. That is huge, but it came at at the urging, I think, of the United States to pony up more to, really, commit to the support of Ukraine, because we can't lose Ukraine. We've got to support them. We have to have this unified force. And I think the reluctance of the Japanese Prime Minister was because he's already spending money. They've just announced another supplement for getting through the summer months. It is somewhat good news, because even though there's the bank issues in the United States, it does add an additional buffer here. But yeah, at some point in time, people are going to ask, as they do here in our room, where does this money come from? Is it just the printing presses that are just churning out more money? The Bank of Japan producing more bonds and then buying them? It's really curious. And with Ukraine, I think the Japanese do not see that Ukraine is a critical geopolitical element in their dynamic. They've got other things that are going on here. Russia is building up more forces in the north, in Sakhalin, and also in conjunction with what's going on with the Chinese. So there's this huge dynamic there, and we haven't even talked about North Korea. So the Japanese have their hands full without the inclusion of the United States designs on Ukraine and NATO, and what's going on with Russia. So I think that explains part of it. But once again, Kishida is he's the chairman of the G7. So the G7 are all pulling together. So you need to be pulling together too. I think that's part of the dynamic. He wants to be viewed as a global leader. He sees that as his way to receive re-election as prime minister, and that's his forte. That's what he's really good at. He's not as good at the domestic politics as we've talked about before. So I think that he would like to spend more on the domestic, but he's required to spend more on the geopolitics. So you take one away from the other, and you're going to suffer a little bit. So let's see how he's able to dance that very delicate dance.
Right. Well, and also you mentioned some challenges here in Japan and the Bank of Japan, and that we're going to have a new governor of the bank from April. And also, if you have any, let's say, any information about how let's say the things that are happening with the Silicon Valley Bank and also Signature Bank and Credit Suisse, are there any chances of those, let's say, shaky, how can I put them? Anyway, of what is happening with those banks
Yeah.
affecting the Japanese financial system or the decisions of the Bank of Japan here?
So there's a lot going on in the United States with Fed Chairman Powell and Treasury Secretary Yellen. There's a lot of controversy going on there. She's going to secure the depositors. She's not going to secure the depositors. She's going to secure some of the depositors. What she is attempting to avoid is the contagion of what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and also some of the other large banks. The movement they've taken over the last 2 weeks is being carefully watched, and the problem is that the backstop that the United States creates to shore this up only enhances more inflation. So the Fed chairman also announced this last week that he's increasing the rate of money once again, and he's also gone on the record and saying these rates are going to be increasing more frequently, and the jumps are going to be a bit higher. And I think what he's saying, we were talking tongue-in-cheek earlier, but I think what he's saying is be prepared, because inflation is going to hit. That is unavoidable. They're trying to hide that. They're trying to dampen that, but they've got two bad choices. They can either let some of these banks fail and then cause a kind of a run to the larger banks that have been promoted as being secure. So that means the regional banks will fall. People will lose their money. That's going to cause a real shift. Or they can secure that, and then the inflation rate in the United States is going to increase. It has to increase in order to accommodate the increase of money that's being pumped into the system. The way that that's going to impact or infect Japan is if there is closure there, money wants to go someplace safe. Japan has always been considered to be safe. It's very well managed. It's centrally managed. It's a different system than it is in the United States. And as you know, Kuroda, Governor Kuroda, the longest, 10 years he's been the Bank of Japan governor. He has held firm to the easy money policy and to holding inflation at 2%. He's missed that mark. But with the new governor, who knows how he's going to be dealing with it. But I think even if the contagion in the United States, if it's big, yes, it'll impact the entire world. It will exacerbate what we already anticipate to be a global recession as we move into the summer months. But I think if they can maintain it and not cause any kind of big shift, Japan will be relatively unharmed and might benefit as a result of that. But I think any way you look at it, and there are other people here in the room that are much smarter than me on this particular issue, within the next 2 years, there's real pain to be had because of the adjustments that need to be made for how much money is being spent, how much money is being created, and how that money is being denominated and how it's being secured. It used to be a gold standard. It used to be gold that secured that. But now you've got fractional reserves. The banks don't have the cash on hand. They're just zeros and ones that are being managed. And that's kind of how it's being done in Japan as well. So digital currency, the issue with digital currency is a major component of this. It looks like it is going to go forward as a consequence of this growing kind of disaster, I think I can say. So there are a lot of very significant changes that are afoot, and a lot of people don't want that digital currency. They want digital currency, they just don't want it to be centrally controlled. And I think that's the big fight. That's the next big fight.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Also, there is a comment once again. Well, this time it is from David, and I think that it's more in the area of geopolitics. So it is. I'm going to read it. Unlike her NATO and Western allies, Japan seems to be highly aware that the war in Ukraine is not truly a proxy war against Russia, but instead it is more accurately described as a proxy war against China through Russia. So I believe that, this could be quite a controversial opinion as well, but if you can comment on it, Timothy, go ahead.
Who's that from, David?
David, yeah.
That's a very sophisticated question, and the analysis kind of exceeds my ability to kind of address it here. David, if you can come up and talk about that a little bit, very briefly, to attune the audience to that thought, I think it bears talking about. Is it a proxy war between, Russia and the United States, or is it an add-on for really China and the United States? I think it's a little bit hard for me to address that. And as you said, Maya, it would be very controversial. But thanks for the question, David, if you're not going to come up. But maybe we can talk about it, or write to Maya, and maybe we put it on the agenda for next week.
Yes, we can do that. And I believe that depending on how you look at, the situation at present, there are different opinions there, of course. And so Timothy, I actually asked you about the challenges that the Japanese financial system may have because of the events in Europe and the United States, because there is some information that the Japanese government pension fund has invested actually in those banks that are now under question. So it has invested in both the Silicon Valley and the Signature Bank. So that's why I asked the question, but maybe we can talk a little bit next time again.
Yes, okay, thank you very much for that.
Right. Okay, and then another comment here. Janos, thank you. We should not talk about Ukraine and only concentrate on we should only concentrate on Japanese politics. Yes, that is our purpose actually here. Thank you, Janos, for the guidance.
I think in our defense, though, this is a big deal. It's a big deal for Japan, particularly because Japan is hosting the G7, and everybody in the G7 is consumed with what's going on in Ukraine. And I think a lot of people, kind of maybe the quiet majority, in fact, really have questions about what's going on and who's doing what and why you're doing this and what is the real game that's going on here. There are a lot of questions that are going on there, but it does have an impact on Japanese politics. And so I apologize if it rubs you wrong, but it's pretty important that he made a secret visit to a war zone. He's giving this money in support of this unified coalition. It's something that can't be discounted, and it impacts how Russia is now going to view Japan and how they're going to be building up their forces in the Sakhalin and in the Northern Territories region, kind of a threatened dynamic with China in the south and Russia in the north. It's all interrelated. So to me, it is important, and it has its political implications too. Did I lose you, Maya? You're talking with your microphone off. Here we go.
Oh, sorry. Yes. No, I was busy because Han, she shared the link to a work, well, an article actually that she and Professor Nagy published. So if you're interested into it, you can click on the link in the room chat and go straight to
Oh,
that
this is the article
report.
that
Yes.
they published just this last week. Excellent article. I didn't know you co-authored that.
Yeah. Thank you, Han.
Congratulations.
Gabor. Yeah, congratulations. And Gabor, thank you
Yes,
for joining
yeah,
us.
yes. I just want to follow up on what Timothy has just said. Yes, it's a big deal that Kishida visited Ukraine, met with Zelensky, not just a leader of Japan, but as a chair of G7. Fortunate timing. It coincided with the World Baseball Classics, and everybody was concentrating on the semifinal and the final while Kishida was in Kiev. But such is life. But another big deal, and I'd like to highlight, it's what's been going on between Korea and Japan at a very fast pace. It's a remarkable reconciliation and rapprochement, and very great initiative by the Korean president, and good reactions from Japan, and very realpolitik at its best to put their interest first, and put emotional and historic things aside. Uh, so I think what's going on between now with Korea and Japan is a very important thing. Maybe more important than his visiting Kiev.
I I really agree with you. Do you have any insight on the invitation to the G7, and was that forwarded or was that withheld?
To Korea,
Yes.
uh, I think Yoon was invited, so he's on the list of him. That's it was in the press too.
Okay, that's good news because that's
Yes,
what should have happened.
yes, exactly. I
Great.
completely agree. And I think what Yoon did, that what bought him a ticket to Hiroshima,
Yeah.
and it would have been very stupid from
Awkward.
Japan if they, yeah. After all this, so I'm so happy to see this development,
Yes.
and because normally these two countries should be natural allies, uh, to democracies, to market economies, allied with the US, facing similar threats from North Korea, China, facing same issues like low birth rates. So they have a lot in commons, and generally the two nations have a lot in commons. Uh, so I'm just so happy to see this, and I hope they can keep the momentum alive, and can sell this thing at home,
Yeah.
which is another task, especially for Yoon, who's in a more fragile
His
position.
approval ratings are not as good as Kishida's are right
Yeah.
now. So
Yes,
he's
and
got a delicate dance.
yes, and he doesn't hold the majority in the parliament,
Right.
so it's this guy is brave. So I hats off to Yoon, and and yeah, so clever, not to trying to gain short term wins by playing the anti-Japanese
Yeah.
card, but just looking forward, and yeah, just great stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Gabor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Okay, so David, understood, and thank you for joining us, even though it is midnight for you. Yes, I appreciate that. Well, Timothy, it looks like we actually have gone through all the comments and questions at the moment. So maybe I can let you go, and well, we can meet again next week. So, yes, hopefully, well, it's not hopefully, actually, I will probably have to get a new computer so that we can go live.
Maya, have you tried yelling at it?
Well,
That
I
usually
didn't
works with
actually.
me.
My cat did, and yeah, my cat was really like meowing all the time. It is this morning. But who knows? It could have had the opposite effect. I don't know really, but we'll see.
Well,
Yes.
maybe our numbers will shoot up since we don't have the visuals.
I'm sorry for you putting makeup this morning and all that effort
Oh,
that
it
went
took
in
almost
vain.
all morning. Gosh.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that.
So
Okay.
thank you very much, Maya. Thank you for hosting. Thank you for pulling this platform together and for offering me an opportunity to talk about what I feel is important in Japanese politics. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the audience too.
Well, it's a pleasure always to have you here. And then also you have a very nice message from Tim, who says enjoy the boat show. So hopefully, yes, you can have a look at some of the boats. And yes, and from Stephen, thanks Timothy. Enjoy the boat show in Yokohama. Appreciation. Oh,
Thanks.
thank you,
Thanks, guys.
Stephen.
Thanks very
Yes,
much.
thank you. Okay, so that's all for today. Once again, I apologize for any inconveniences. Hopefully, we'll see you next week once again. This time during the live stream.
Yeah, we want to see the
And
baths and
Yes.
boat and yeah.
I want to
right.
see the kimono girl walking backwards.
Me too, actually, yes. Okay, so to everybody, wherever you are, have a good day or a good night, and well, have a good week as well. We're looking forward to having you again next week, 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning with Tim Sullivan, and 8:20 on Sunday with Timothy Langley.
Yoo-hoo.
Have a great day and see
Thank
you.
you. Thank you,
Thank you.
David. Good night. See you next week.
See you
Thanks,
next
everybody.
week.